Kentucky is full of quiet hills, deep forests, and river valleys that hide stories far older than the state itself. Across the landscape, you find strange carvings, forgotten earthworks, and ancient sites that don't fully match what we know about the people who once lived here. These mysteries raise questions about lost cultures, unusual symbols, and moments in history that still don't have clear answers. The mystery of Indian Fort Mountain near Berea. Indian Fort Mountain sits above the town of Berea like a quiet guardian. If you've ever stood on the trails up there, you know how unusual the ridge feels. The land narrows, rises, and twists in ways that almost seem shaped on purpose. And tucked along those ridge lines are the old stone walls that spark decades of questions. These walls are the heart of the mystery because nobody can fully agree on who built them, why they were built, or what their layout was meant to do. When you first see them, they don't look like the massive stone structures you'd expect from far-off ancient cultures. They're low, scattered, broken in places, almost like the remains of something that once had more order. But when you follow the lines they form, the pattern doesn't feel random. Some parts run along narrow ridges that give a clear view of the valleys below. Others sit against steep drops where there's really no reason for a wall unless someone cared about controlling movement across the mountain. The stones vary in size. Some are small enough to carry in one hand, others too heavy to lift alone, and they were stacked without mortar, which means whoever built them understood how to balance weight on uneven ground. Archaeologists have suggested the walls were built by the woodland-era peoples who lived in this region long before settlers arrived. That explanation makes sense in a general way, because the area has many signs of ancient activity. But the strange thing is that the walls here don't follow the typical patterns of woodland fort sites. They're not thick enough to act as full defenses, not tall enough to stop an attack, and not arranged like other known fortification systems. Instead, the layout feels more like a series of boundaries or markers placed at key points. This is where the mystery grows stronger. Were they defensive? Were they ceremonial? Were they meant for something else entirely? Walking along the ridge, you start to notice how the land shapes your path. There are places where the rock forms natural bottlenecks. At those points, you'll often find stones piled or shaped into something that looks like an old barrier. It's easy to imagine people directing movement through these spots. Maybe it was for protection. Maybe it was to guide groups during gatherings. Maybe it had nothing to do with defense at all, and was more about marking sacred spaces. The truth is, the purpose remains unclear. Another strange detail about Indian Fort Mountain is the number of rock outcrops with flat faces that line up with sunrise or sunset at certain times of the year. Some hikers swear parts of the old stone lines seem to point toward places where the sun hits just right on solstices or equinoxes. These ideas haven't been fully proven, but they're hard to ignore when you're up there watching the first light slide across the ridge. It makes you wonder if the builders understood the sky in a way that helped them set the walls as markers for seasonal events. There are also mound-like rises on the mountain that make the terrain even more mysterious. They aren't large enough to be major burial mounds, but they don't look entirely natural either. Some researchers think erosion may have changed the look of older earthworks. Others believe they might be remnants of small platforms or gathering spots. When you stand on one of those rises, you get a clear sense of why someone might choose that exact point. The view opens in several directions, and the wind feels different, almost louder, as if the ridge itself is carrying sound. People who hike there today often mention the same strange feeling. It's not fear or anything dark, it's more like the sense that the land holds memories. You feel watched, but not in a negative way, more like the mountain is aware of you moving across it. That impression gets stronger when you come across stretches where the stone walls reappear after long gaps. The stones sit half buried in leaves and dirt, but they still form lines. Some parts curve gently, others run straight along the top of narrow passages. In a few places, the stones look like they were rearranged or rebuilt at some point, long after the original construction. It makes you wonder how many generations interacted with these structures. One detail that adds to the mystery is how far the walls extend. They don't cover the whole mountain, but they reach across enough of it to show planning. They follow the land in a way that suggests the builders understood every rise and dip of the terrain. They didn't try to change the mountain, they worked with it. When you think about ancient people surveying these ridges without modern tools, it becomes even more impressive. Local stories add their own layer. Some say the walls were built to watch over hunting grounds. Others believe this was once a major gathering place where different groups came together during certain seasons. There are even old tales about the mountain being a spiritual boundary, where ceremonies were held and where the walls served as markers for different zones. These stories don't always match each other, but they all point toward one thing: the mountain was important long before Berea existed. Standing on the overlook, you start to notice sounds differently too. The wind carries through the rock gaps in a way that can make voices echo more than usual. If a group stood in some of the natural amphitheater-like spaces, their voices would carry across surprising distances. Was that part of the design? Did the builders understand how sound moved across the mountain? It's impossible to know for sure, but those natural features feel too perfect to ignore. Today, the area is known more for its trails, its views, and the peaceful feeling of being high above the town. Families hike here, students from Berea College explore the ridge, and visitors look out at the rolling hills stretching toward the horizon. The walls are still there, some easier to find than others. Time has worn them down, but pieces remain strong enough to remind you that someone once put real effort into shaping this place. What makes Indian Fort Mountain such a compelling mystery is not that the structures are huge or flashy, it's that they feel intentional, yet we can't settle on what that intention was. Every clue opens another question. Were the walls part of a fort? If so, why are they built so lightly? Were they ceremonial markers? If that's true, why do they follow defensive-style ridges? Were they boundaries for travel or trade? Or were they simply practical structures that served a purpose we can't see anymore? The mystery also has a personal side. When you're up there walking past the stones, you can't help imagining the people who once moved across these same ridges. They had their own reasons for stacking these rocks. They had their own stories tied to the land. Whatever their intentions were, the mountain holds pieces of that past, still visible after centuries of wind and rain. In the present day, the site is peaceful and open, but not untouched. The trails bring steady foot traffic. The walls continue to weather. Some parts are hard to spot unless you already know where to look. And yet the mountain still keeps its atmosphere. Even on busy days, you'll find quiet corners where the old stones rest under moss and leaves. You can put your hand on them and feel the rough, cool surface. It's a small reminder that human hands shaped these long before any modern map existed. My own impression is that Indian Fort Mountain feels like a place where boundaries once mattered. Maybe not in a defensive way, but in a symbolic one. The layout doesn't strike me as random. It feels like a map carved into the ridge itself, guiding people through zones of meaning we no longer understand. And that's what makes it powerful. It isn't a mystery built on legends or fear, it's built on silence. The builders left no written record, no clear explanation. They left stone, sunlight, wind, and a layout that refuses to fully reveal its purpose. Even after spending time on the ridge, I don't feel closer to an answer, but I do feel connected to the land in a way that's hard to explain. Maybe that's the real purpose of the place. Maybe the stones were arranged to remind anyone who walks there, even hundreds of years later, that some parts of the world are meant to be felt more than understood. The Lost Redbird Petroglyph Panels. The Lost Redbird Petroglyph Panels are one of those Kentucky mysteries that pull you in before you even see them. The name alone makes you picture bright red symbols on stone walls deep in the hills, and honestly, that image isn't far from the truth. These panels were once known for a set of carved figures that people described as birds, humans, spirals, and shapes that didn't match anything in the usual catalog of native artwork. And the strangest part is that some of the carvings seemed to show details that felt out of place for the time period they were made in. That sense of something doesn't match is what still keeps people talking about them. The panels were originally located near the old Redbird River area, tucked away in a rocky cliffside. If you can imagine wandering through thick Kentucky woods, crossing quiet streams, and then coming across a massive stone slab covered in carvings, that's the kind of moment people described. Some of the symbols were neat and shallow, almost like someone scratched them with care. Others were deeper grooves, carved with clear force. A few figures stood out because they looked like they didn't belong to the same style. That's where the mystery deepens. There were what people called alphabetic carvings, lines and shapes that some believed looked like early writing systems from faraway parts of the world. You can see how theories started spreading. Some thought the carvings came from ancient travelers or explorers who reached North America long before the known groups. Others pushed back, saying the designs were simply unusual native symbols that had been misunderstood. Without full records or original context, it's hard to know which interpretation is closer to the truth. What made these panels even more confusing was the mix of styles. You had figures that looked like traditional local petroglyph art, but then right beside them were markings that didn't line up with common woodland or Mississippian designs. It created this sense that either several groups carved into the same rock over a long stretch of time, or someone in the past created something very intentional that we still don't fully understand. When people visited the site years ago, many talked about the feeling of standing in front of the panel and trying to make sense of it. The rock was wide, almost like a natural wall. Seeing human-like figures next to strange symbols gave the whole place an atmosphere of something half forgotten. You could feel the age of it, even if you had no idea what any of it meant. That's the thing about petroglyphs. Once their meaning fades, the silence around them becomes part of the mystery. Unfortunately, the story took a turn. The original panel didn't stay where it was. The rock broke off during a major collapse, and the carvings were nearly lost for good. For a while, people weren't even sure where the fragments went, or if they survived in one piece. There were stories about them being moved, stored, forgotten, then rediscovered. It added another layer, almost like the mystery didn't want to stay still. A piece of important history slipped from the landscape and almost disappeared entirely. Some fragments ended up being preserved, but the panel's full layout is gone. When you read accounts from folks who saw it before the collapse, you get the sense that the rock held far more carvings than the surviving pieces show. That leaves us with descriptions, old photos, and personal memories. Each one is slightly different, like people were trying to piece together a puzzle that already had missing pieces. One of the most debated parts is the carving that looked like a bird. It had an odd shape, almost like wings held wide, with a body that didn't match typical native designs in the region. That single figure sparked long discussions. Was it symbolic? Was it ceremonial? Or was it just a creative design carved by someone who never expected it to be examined centuries later? Without context, every guess feels possible. Another carving looked like a row of symbols that some people thought resembled early European or Mediterranean lettering. People got excited about the idea of ancient contact, but there's no solid proof. It might be coincidence, it might be misinterpretation, or it might be something we haven't figured out yet. That open space between facts and imagination is where the mystery grows. When you think about the people who might have carved these figures, it brings a bit of quiet wonder. They were standing in the same forests, hearing the same wind move through the trees, carving symbols into rock because those symbols meant something to them. Maybe they were marking a sacred place. Maybe they were telling a story. Maybe they were leaving messages for people who lived in the nearby valleys. Whatever their reasons were, they left something behind that held enough importance for them to put effort into it. Today, when people talk about the lost redbird petroglyph panels, there's a sense of sadness mixed with curiosity. The original rock face is gone from its place. The land still holds the memory of it, though. When you walk through the area now, the forest feels thick and quiet, and it's easy to imagine how the carvings once stood bright against the stone. The forest almost feels like it's guarding the story, keeping parts of it hidden. There are a few smaller stones in the region that hold carvings believed to be connected to the original panel. They show spirals, crosses, and odd shapes that hint at the larger masterpiece that once sat on that cliff. But looking at fragments is never the same as seeing the whole. It leaves gaps in your understanding, gaps that your mind instinctively wants to fill. That's part of the reason why theories keep circulating. My impression of the mystery is that it feels like a reminder of how fragile ancient knowledge can be. Something carved with intention and meaning can sit for hundreds of years, only to break and vanish in an instant. And when that happens, all we're left with are stories, guesses, and what little the rocks decide to keep. The lost redbird petroglyph panels aren't famous because the carvings were perfect. They're famous because they were unusual, beautiful, confusing, and then taken from their original home before we could fully understand them. If you visit the area now, it's peaceful. The trees grow thick along the river. The air feels cool even in summer. There's no grand marker pointing to where the panel once stood. Most people walk the trails unaware that a major piece of Kentucky's ancient history was once carved into the cliffs nearby. But if you know the story, the ground feels different. You can almost picture the rock face rising from the earth, covered in symbols that stared out across the valley. The present-day fragments don't answer the big questions. They don't explain why the mix of symbols feels so unusual. They don't reveal who carved the alphabet-like shapes or why. They simply show that someone wanted to leave a story behind, a story that outlived them, even if it now survives in broken pieces. And maybe that's why the lost redbird petroglyph panels still matter. Even in fragments, they remind us of how much of the past has slipped away and how much still sits beneath the surface, waiting for someone who's willing to look closely and wonder. The ancient earthworks of Wickliffe Mounds. The ancient earthworks of Wickliffe Mounds sit on a quiet rise above the Mississippi River floodplain, and when you first walk up to the site, it doesn't hit you right away just how old and rich this place really is. You see gentle hills and open fields, and maybe a building or two that shields the excavated areas. But the deeper you step into the landscape, the more you feel something beneath the surface. These mounds weren't random piles of dirt. They were shaped by people who lived here centuries before the first Europeans ever set foot in Kentucky. And the design, the placement, and the size of the earthworks create a mystery that still hasn't been fully solved. Wickliffe was once a village built by a Mississippian group, and these were people who understood structure, ceremony, and community life better than most give them credit for. The mounds here were arranged with purpose. One was a platform mound where leaders likely stood. Another was tied to rituals or gatherings. Others served as markers or raised spaces for important buildings. Each one is part of a layout that feels almost like a small city, except everything rises gently from the earth instead of being built with stone or wood alone. When you're standing in the middle of the site, you can almost picture people walking between the mounds, carrying baskets, cooking food, and gathering for events we no longer understand. But what makes Wickliffe such a mystery isn't just the fact that the mounds exist. Many ancient sites in the Midwest and South have similar earthworks. The mystery here comes from the questions surrounding the people who built them, the reason the village shifted over time, and the surprising discoveries found inside the mounds themselves. For years, researchers tried to understand the pattern of life here, why the mounds were arranged the way they were, what the community believed, and what caused them to eventually leave the site. Even now, there are more questions than answers. When early excavations began in the 20th century, people quickly realized Wickliffe held much more than simple dirt piles. Beneath the layers were signs of structures, ceremonial objects, unusual pottery, and burials that suggested a complex society. But the early digs also damaged parts of the site, leaving gaps in the record that we'll probably never fill. Those gaps, those missing details, are part of what keeps the mystery alive today. Every missing piece forces us to guess how the ancient builders lived, worked, and saw the world. Standing near the central mound, you notice how the ground dips slightly around the edges. It creates a natural circle, almost like an open plaza. Some locals think this area once held festivals or important gatherings. Others believe it was part of a spiritual center that guided much of the village's daily rhythm. The truth might be somewhere in between, because the Mississippian people often blended daily life with ceremony. To them, the world wasn't divided into practical and spiritual, everything connected. What adds even more curiosity is how the mounds line up with the seasons. Some researchers believe certain mounds may have been positioned to track the movement of the sun. On solstices or equinoxes, shadows fall in interesting ways across the site. It's subtle. You won't notice it unless you're looking for it. But once you see it, it's hard to ignore. Was this on purpose? Did the builders understand astronomy well enough to shape the village around the sky? The Mississippians did it at other sites, so it's possible they did it here too. Inside the mounds, the items found raise more questions. Pottery pieces with unique designs show up in patterns that don't always match those from nearby sites. Some designs suggest contact with groups far away, maybe through trade routes stretching across multiple states. Other items found inside the earthworks hint at rituals that might have involved music, dance, or offerings to the spirits of the land. One thing is clear, Wickliffe wasn't an isolated village. It was part of a larger connected world, one that had its own rules and beliefs long before Kentucky existed on any map. But perhaps the biggest question is why the village declined. There's no dramatic proof of warfare or invasion. There are no burned layers or signs of sudden disaster. Instead, it seems like the village was slowly abandoned. Some think environmental changes like flooding or shifts in the river made life harder. Others believe social or political changes caused people to move elsewhere. And then there's the quiet theory, the one many visitors whisper about. Maybe the place was connected to ceremonies so important that the community eventually moved its sacred center to a new location. Whatever the reason, the people left without leaving a clear explanation, and the mounds remained behind, waiting for the next generation to rediscover them. When you walk the grounds today, the atmosphere is calm. The air feels still in a way that almost makes you lower your voice without thinking about it. The mounds rise gently around you, not tall but steady, like they're watching. There's something comforting about the shape of the land, something that makes you feel grounded. And yet at the same time, the place carries a quiet weight. You know there were lives here, families, leaders, teachers, traders, but their voices are gone, replaced only by the clues they left in the soil. If you step into the covered excavation buildings, you see the layers of earth cut away like slices of history. Each layer holds pieces of pottery, ash, soil, and tools that once sat on the floors of ancient structures. When you stand above these areas and look down, it's hard not to picture the inside of a busy village home. You imagine kids running around, people grinding corn, someone shaping a pot, someone else preparing a fire. And then you think about how all of that ended, how time buried the village and left only hints of what once was. What strikes me the most about Wickliffe is how human the site feels. It isn't a massive pyramid or a mysterious stone circle. It's a place where people lived out their daily lives while also building structures that meant something bigger. It shows that even without steel or writing or massive monuments, ancient people could shape the land with a purpose that still shows after hundreds of years. Visiting today, you'll find the site well cared for, with paths that guide you around the mounds. It's peaceful, but also a bit haunting once you understand how much was lost in the early excavations and how much meaning will probably stay hidden forever. The land is soft under your feet, birds move through the trees, everything feels slow and open, but that openness hides the layers beneath, layers that hold stories we can only guess. My own view of Wickliffe is that it represents the kind of mystery that doesn't try to shock you. Instead, it invites you to listen. You don't need wild theories or dramatic legends to feel something here. The mystery comes from the silence, from the missing pages in the story. The builders shaped these mounds with intention, but time erased their voices. All we have now are the shapes they left in the earth, the objects they buried, and the questions those objects raise. Even so, the site still has life. You see kids learning about the past, families walking the trails, researchers studying soil samples, and travelers like you and me pausing to take in the wide view of the river valley. The mounds aren't forgotten, they just speak in a quieter way now, and maybe that's fitting. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved completely. Some are meant to remind us that the world has deeper layers than we notice. Wickliffe does that well. It stands as a soft but steady reminder that ancient people shaped this land long before modern history began, and they left behind questions that still echo across the fields when the wind moves through. The Livingston County Rock Art Shelters. The Livingston County Rock Art Shelters sit out in a quiet part of western Kentucky, tucked into sandstone overhangs that most people would walk past without even noticing. They don't shout for attention. They don't rise like mounds or stand like tall stone walls. They hide, and maybe that's part of what makes them so strange. These shelters hold carvings and symbols that feel older than the land around them, older than the nearby settlements, older even than the familiar stories we tell about early Kentucky. When you step under those low ceilings and let your eyes adjust to the shade, the marks on the stone drift into view, and suddenly you realize you're standing in front of messages carved by people who lived here hundreds, maybe thousands of years ago. The first thing you notice about the shelters is how natural they look. They weren't carved by humans. The rock was shaped by time, water, and wind, leaving shallow caves and long overhangs perfect for taking cover from rain or heat. You can imagine ancient families sitting here warming themselves by a fire. You can picture travelers stopping to rest for a night before moving on. But somewhere in those long stretches of years, someone picked up a stone tool and carved symbols into the soft rock. That moment, whenever it happened, turned these natural shelters into something far more mysterious. Some carvings are simple, straight lines, cross marks, shapes that might be tally marks or counts of something. Others are more detailed, human-like figures with outstretched arms, animal shapes, circles with radiating lines, spirals, and odd symbols that don't match anything you'd expect. It's the mix that confuses people. You have designs that look familiar to Native American art in the region, but then next to them sit strange marks that don't fit neatly into any known style. Every time someone tries to categorize them, a new detail breaks the pattern. One of the shelters has a panel where the carvings stretch across the back wall like a long timeline. Some figures look newer than others, with edges sharper and surfaces less weathered. Others are so worn down they almost vanish unless the light hits just right. This mix makes people wonder if the shelter was used across several generations, or maybe even several cultural groups. It's easy to picture a traveler carving a mark to leave a memory, and then years later someone else returning and adding another layer to the story. Over time, the wall becomes a kind of shared message board for people who never knew each other. A lot of folks who visit the site talk about the atmosphere. When you step into the shelter, the temperature drops just a little. The air feels still, almost held in place by the rock. Voices don't echo, they get absorbed, and that quiet makes the carvings feel even more alive. You find yourself leaning closer, trying to make out every detail, and the longer you look, the more the symbols start to blend into stories your mind tries to form. It's natural to wonder what the artist wanted to say. Were they marking territory, recording visions, honoring spirits, passing down warnings? Or were they simply carving because it was part of their world, something normal for them, but mysterious to us? One carving that gets a lot of attention is a shape that looks almost like a human figure holding something above its head. The body is simple, a torso, legs and arms, but the object overhead is what makes people pause. Some think it's a weapon, others say it's a basket. A few suggest it might be a sun symbol or something ceremonial. Without context, every idea holds weight. You look at it long enough, and the shape starts changing depending on what story you're imagining that day. Another panel has a spiral carved deep into the rock. Spirals show up in a lot of ancient art around the world. They can mean journeys, seasons, the sun, water, or life itself. Here the spiral sits alone, not linked to any other figure, as if someone carved it with intention and then left it untouched. It's smooth and steady, almost hypnotic. When you run your hand near it, not touching, just close enough to feel the cool surface, you start to think about the person who carved it. How long did it take? What made them choose that exact spot? Did the spiral represent something sacred, or was it something deeply personal? What deepens the mystery even more is the fact that there isn't much around the shelters. No major settlements, no big mound complexes, no long series of artifacts scattered across the nearby woods. It's not the kind of place where you'd expect to find organized ritual sites or major trade hubs. That makes the carvings feel even more intentional. Someone came here for a reason strong enough to mark the stone. Maybe the quiet was part of that reason. Maybe the shelter itself felt sacred, or safe, or significant, in a way we can't understand through modern eyes. Over the years, a number of researchers visited the shelters to document the art, but the soft stone makes the carvings difficult to preserve. Rain, freezing temperatures, and even moss slowly erase the edges. Some panels already look far more worn than they did just a few decades ago. That fading creates a sense of urgency. It's like watching history disappear in real time. Visitors walk away with a mix of awe and sadness, knowing that someday the symbols might vanish completely, leaving only faded sketches and old photos behind. When you stand inside the shelters today, the present feels thin. You can imagine ancient people stepping through the same gap in the rock, carrying baskets or tools, maybe with kids following close behind. You picture them carving by firelight, sparks bouncing off the stone. Maybe they talked quietly while they worked. Maybe they told stories about the land, or the spirits, or the sky. Whatever they carved, they must have believed it mattered. People don't carve into stone for no reason. What strikes me the most about the Livingston County rock art shelters is the sense that these carvings weren't made to impress anyone. They weren't huge works of public art. They weren't meant to stand out in the landscape. They feel personal, almost private. It's like reading someone's notebook left behind on a shelf. You can flip through the pages, but you don't know the writer's voice. You don't know what their life looked like. You only see the marks they chose to leave. Today, the site sits in a calm, rural area. Trees cluster around the rock formations, and the ground feels soft with leaves and moss. When you step inside the shelters, you hear the wind outside but not inside. Not inside, the rock blocks it out. That quiet, steady silence makes you slow down. You look closer, you take your time, and the more you stare at those carvings, the more you feel like the past is standing a few inches behind you, watching. There's no big visitor center here, no flashing signs, no crowds. It's just you, the stone and the carvings. And strangely, that simplicity might be the best part. You can experience the site in a way that feels raw and real, without distractions. The mystery becomes more personal. It isn't someone else telling you what to think. It's you trying to make sense of the marks on the stone, just like the researchers did, just like the first explorers did, and just like the ancient people who carved them probably expected future eyes to do. My own take on the shelters is that they hold a story we're not meant to fully solve. Maybe the meaning wasn't meant for us. Maybe it was meant only for the people who carved them. But even without the full story, the carvings still speak. They remind you that ancient life wasn't distant or simple. It was layered, emotional, meaningful. People live their lives with hopes, fears, beliefs, and moments of creativity that still linger in the rock long after they're gone. The mystery of the Livingston County rock art shelters isn't loud. It's quiet and steady, like the land around it, and maybe that's why it stays with you after you leave. It's not about proving anything or unlocking a secret. It's about recognizing that history is hidden in small places, not just the famous ones. Sometimes a few carvings on a shaded wall can hold just as much wonder as a massive ancient monument.